All right. Hello, everybody. I'm super excited that we have Jarvis Miller with us here today. He is a data scientist at Spotify and our second guest lecturer of COGS 108 this quarter. First, Jarvis, thank you for taking the time today, especially with all that is going on right now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, anything to like pass by more time during this weird pandemic dystopian world we're living in right now, basically. Yeah.
Perfect. So I just wanted to get us started with you sharing a bit about your path to becoming a data scientist. Would love to hear about it.
Yeah. Thankfully someone just asked me that a couple days ago because I have terrible memory and I forgot my own path until I had to retell it. Yeah, so let's see. So I it's always hard to see like how far back to go. Let's start at undergrad because everyone here is an undergrad. So yeah, I was an undergrad. I went to Rice University, which is in Houston, Texas. It's a small private school. But yeah, so there I started off studying electrical engineering because I had the typical, do what makes money, and we know engineering makes money, or be a brain surgeon. And I was like, okay, out of all those options that you gave me, out of the three options that you gave me, I'll try engineering. That sounds the most interesting. So I started that, and then I took what our version of like Cal 2, so like the typical like integral sequences and series, blah blah blah, my freshman year. And then I also took like an engineering course that would kind of give me an idea of what my work would look like in the field. And so I hated that class. I realized, wow, I don't want to do engineering. Or like if I do it, I'm gonna hate my life in like 3 years, and then probably pivot to a new career. Which I mean, anyone can go through, no matter what career they choose. But I just knew that like electrical engineering wasn't for me. And I also like kind of struggled with math. I went to like I basically went to like a crappy high school. So like I got like good SAT scores and stuff, but like in terms of the preparation and like foundational skills, my school was kind of a joke, my high school at least. So I struggled with math my freshman year. And then I was thinking, okay, well, what the heck should I do? So I decided to do statistics because I was like, oh, statistics, you can probably learn money or earn a lot of money with that. So let me do that. And then I actually decided to become a math major as well. So I double majored in math and statistics because I sucked at math. And I said, well, I'm not just going to get better passively. And I don't recommend this to anybody necessarily. This was just something that worked for me. I said, okay, well, I'm going to major in this so that it's like a sink or swim situation. Like, if I still suck at it, then I'm going to fail. And if I don't suck at it and I learn to appreciate it, then I get the pass and like graduate. So I put myself in that kind of stressful situation. I actually grew to really love math. So I'm very glad that worked out, but don't necessarily recommend that as a general strategy. And so yeah, I did all that. Senior year came about, and it was senior year, fall semester. I was looking into jobs to apply to. I mostly did research during my summers. I didn't really have like an internship. And so I'm a kind of an older person. I went to undergrad 2012 to 2016. And so data science wasn't like a huge term then. Like there might have been a few job listings that had it. But in general, like at least all the statisticians or stat majors in my undergrad, they typically went to a bunch of Excel calculator-esque jobs. And so when I looked at all those jobs, I was like, this is not interesting to me. I don't think that I'm also not going to last more than 5 years here in this field. And so my undergrad research advisor, he told me, well, you may be interested in graduate school, especially because you really enjoy like your math classes, and grad school, you can really dive deep into statistics if you have like a lot of good core math skills. And so I'm also not sure, you can cut this out if you want. But essentially, he told me this thing of you should, if you are interested, you can apply to a PhD program because if you like it, then you can do it and you have a PhD, and that's great. And if you don't like it, you can leave and you didn't spend like $60,000 a year because your PhD program is free and you actually get paid. And if you stay long enough, you can get a master's and leave and you have your master's for free, essentially. The only con is that you are taking a bunch of PhD courses, so you might not be the most job ready because you'll be taking a bunch of theoretical classes, whereas a lot of master students tend to take classes that prepare them for the job industry. So there are pros and cons. And so I decided I'm going to go to the PhD, get my master's, if I don't like it. But I actually thought I would. But essentially, I didn't like it that much. So I left with my master's after 2 years. So 2016 to 2018. My second summer, I got a data science internship at BuzzFeed. So I worked at BuzzFeed in New York. There I did, what did I do there? I worked on like their Tasty app. So we have Tasty app is like this cooking thing. And essentially I worked on recommendation systems there. I got a lot of great experience. I learned the stark differences between academia and industry, especially coming from academia PhD world and not even academia masters. There's even larger difference between PhD world and industry world. I learned a lot. And then I got a return offer there. And so I started there full time around fall of 2018. And I worked there until about August 2019. And then I moved to Spotify until now. So that's pretty much my journey. Yeah, I think that answers your question, hopefully. And if there are any clarifying things that you want, like, please let me know.
Yeah, no, I have a few follow-up questions. That was exactly what I was looking for. I am going to leave that PhD advice in there because I think students should know that that is a thing, and a lot of them don't.
I
And
agree.
the ones that don't know are the ones that don't know a ton about grad school. And so I think it's really important to know.
Yeah.
Um, my partner is an attorney, and he says very similar things. Like, if I had known what law school debt looked like, or had known those other science options, like,
Yeah.
I may have made a different decision. So I
Hmm.
think more knowledge these students can have, the better about this
Perfect.
process.
Perfect.
Um, I I have a lot of follow-up questions about your journey. One question that I think, because it's more recent in your life than our other guest lecturer this quarter, is a senior data scientist who has been working and manages a
Mm.
team. So we're getting these two very different perspectives. Um, I'm going to come up to your Spotify job soon, but how did you approach getting your internship? And like, why do you think you were a good fit?
That is a great question. I think I was a good fit because BuzzFeed is one of the few places that does internship applications well. So there's this terrible thing that I'm sure everyone here knows about, this whole audience, of what comes first, the experience or the first job. The first job is always asking for 3 to 5 years of experience. And then it's like, where do I get the 3 to 5 years of experience? It's terrible. Yeah, so that I definitely felt that like my first summer of my PhD, I applied to all sorts of places. I applied to Spotify internship, things like Lyft, Uber, Google, etc. I didn't get a single interview. Like no one even reached out to me. My first summer after my PhD. I should preface this. I didn't know how to code during undergrad, really. I didn't really take any coding classes. I took like an R class and that taught me like ggplot and stuff. And so that summer 2017, when after I got rejected from everywhere, I was like, okay, well, I should really probably learn how to code better. I took like a C++ class like the previous semester, but like every place was asking for like Python or like R. And so that summer, thankfully, I think I really lucked out. The summer before my BuzzFeed internship, one of the advisors in my program, he manages stats models, one of the Python statistical language or packages for doing stats. And so that was a great thing for me because I ended up collaborating with him and I did like a Google Summer of Code sort of internship with him. And I implemented like survey methods and stats models so that a lot of people could analyze survey data. Um, and so that helped me learn a lot of the core Python things as well as like getting better at GitHub, learning how to just not program for like an assignment and like getting code that works for me versus code that will be useful for future people to work on or read or digest. So I learned a lot through that. And I think I just got really lucky there having that connection. And then the next summer, or like coming into the next summer, the one where I got the BuzzFeed internship, once again, I applied to everywhere that I applied the previous summer. Once again, I didn't get interviews really anywhere. And I think that that was mostly because I didn't really have any sort of data science experience. I had like, research from undergrad where it was like medical stats related things. And then I had this one Google Summer of Code, but that looked very like engineering instead of like you can use SQL, you can do statistical methods, you can analyze survey or A/B test stuff. And so I think a number of them still were just like, okay, you're not. And also because at that point I was saying I'm a PhD student, I have 3 more years of school left, and they might have also been like, you're not graduating anytime soon. So yeah, no. But BuzzFeed actually was one of the only places that came back to me and gave me an interview. And yeah, so that interview I think was very fair. It wasn't like it wasn't the typical tech interview of algorithms, like weird probability questions, combinatoric questions that a lot of people are very annoyed come up in a lot of data science things. For an internship, they really looked for people who could improve their experiences instead of people who already mostly have experience. We just want them to get used to our problems, and so then we can give them a return offer afterwards. They really were like, we are okay hiring people who don't necessarily have a lot of experience. So a lot of the questions they asked me were like about previous projects that I worked on, various like modeling questions, and stuff like that. And so I felt like I was a pretty good candidate there, because they didn't ask a lot of obscene things. And I feel like a lot of people would be great candidates for that internship. The only thing though, and I think that they might have changed that, was that my year at least, they were looking for mostly grad students to interview for data science, and I think they opened that to undergrads now. But yeah, that definitely helped a lot, because they asked things that a lot of people could just study up on, or a lot of people get experience on in school. So I didn't necessarily have to do like cracking the coding interview, going through all those questions. I didn't have to try and, you know, do like, I don't know. I did a lot of ad hoc analyses on my own time, that I was able to talk about. So like, one cool thing that I did was, what did I do? I did like if you are from R coming into pandas, like here's a quick tutorial on how some of the functions that you use, like in ggplot, dplyr, etc., map to pandas. I did like a tutorial on that was like online, so they saw that. And I also did like an analysis on like music sampling history. So like there's this one very popular drum solo, I think it's called like the Amen break, and it's been sampled since I think the 60s. And looking at how that's been picked up throughout the years by different genres and etc. And I did like an analysis on that where I I did some web scraping, I posed my own question, I answered it, and I basically wrote kind of like from the beginning to end. And so I was able to talk about stuff like that, as well as like the core projects that I did in school. And so I think they really liked how I took my own initiative as well as a student, and did a lot of my own projects, that I just thought were interesting, not because it was for a grade, um, and stuff like that. So I think that really kind of helped set me apart from some of the other candidates.
Yeah, I want to just clarify for students. So where did you post these analyses?
Oh yeah, on like GitHub and stuff. So, God, it's funny. I haven't ever since I got like my into the industry. I didn't update it at all because I was like, now they only care about my job experiences, and then jobs were also very time consuming, versus like school where you could sometimes finish up homework a couple of days early and then you just have all this extra time to do other things. So I think it's on like jarvmiller.github.io. It's really terrible. God, look at it as inspiration on if I want, I can do this, but don't necessarily try and do the things I did because they don't look that great. But essentially, what I did was that I used Blog Down, like an R package, that was easy to hook up with GitHub, and like basically host the static site. So I would pretty much put my analyses in like a R notebook essentially. And if it was like Python related, then it wouldn't necessarily run, but I would just put like the code snippets and then like the graphs and stuff that might come through that. And so yeah, I use Blog Down and like GitHub to host my static website or static blog.
I brought that up simply one because I saw it and I saw it was on the internet. And of course,
Oh
it's not
yeah.
updated because you have a job. And we do these things. And the students haven't heard this yet, but I talk about how there's these two personas when you're looking for a job. One is like
Hmm.
you do the coursework, you have the course projects, you have the internship after year 2 and 3 and 4, and like you do all the steps that the career center would tell you to do. And then the other one's like the technical hustler that does stuff on
Mm,
their own, doesn't necessarily have all the coursework. And I think you're a
yeah.
good embodiment of that second one, but you need to go do things on your own and put them on the internet and like come up with your own ideas. And I brought it up one so students can look at it and see that like it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be an earth shattering, craziest machine learning neural network you've ever trained, but like your blog posts demonstrate that you can make good visualizations, that you know Python because you use that beautiful soup to do your scraping. You then jumped into R for your visualizations. You can put a narrative. And I think that's a
Hmm.
lot what they're looking for. It might not be the most
Absolutely.
earth shattering finding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'll probably elaborate on this later through any of your future questions. But I do know, like now that I'm at Spotify and I've been doing some of the interviews and interviewing people, a lot of students or a lot of people coming from other jobs, they typically have a lot of technical chops. And across that, you know, the talent or skills seem pretty even across a number of candidates. But being able to go from a vague curiosity, interest, or like question that's posed, and then being able to like map that to something that you can actually do, doing that from scratch without a lot of hand holding, and then telling a story about it that's easily digestible. I think that really sets apart a number of our candidates like at Spotify. And I can see that a lot because a part of our interview gives a question that's kind of hard to, it's not an easy question. Um it's like an intentionally vague question where we hope people define their own metrics or measure that they'll use throughout their analysis. And a number of people I can see are just like, well, I'm used to just having success defined for me. I'm used to knowing what the solution to go towards is versus, okay, I have an ill-defined question. I don't really know how to start that. Or I can answer the question, but it's hard for me to explain how I got to that in non-technical terms or to non-data scientists. And I think going above and beyond and doing these sort of ad hoc or on your own projects really give you some great experience doing that.
Perfect. Yeah, these are the things like I know my students are interested in hearing about, like what you
Hmm.
look for, what you see that differentiates candidates. Um, and I want to get to Spotify in a second. The other
Yeah.
thing I wanted to follow up on was you said you knew that finishing your PhD was not the right track for you. I'm curious what made you realize that so that if students are feeling the same,
Yeah.
they can learn.
So I went to University of Michigan. Great program, great professors. My colleagues were really fun or nice. I got a lot of great friends out of that. But I think there are pros and cons to going to like a reputable school by whatever marks reputable means. And for me, the pro was I had access to a lot of cutting edge research. The con was that the research topics were not that flexible because a lot of these professors were like, this is my expertise, this is what we are known for, and this is what keeps us in our good ranking or whatever. And so I wanted to do like a research project that was a little more applied than uh, what the professors were kind of used to. And so it was hard to get sort of approval on the topic. I can't even remember the topic too much. I think the topic was kind of like, I was partnering with someone from the School of Information, and we were trying to, he had like a edX class where he taught like Python stuff or data science stuff. And we were trying to basically cluster, like use clustering to try and formulate different groups in terms of like incorrect answers, and then try to see if we can figure out a way to label the what is it, the like core misunderstanding that caused the student to give that incorrect response, so that we can give personalized follow-up videos or hints or feedback to the students to address the different needs. Because I mean, I think online education is very important, and I think it's, depending on how it's used, it's the way of the future. Not thinking that it's necessarily going to, you know, take over colleges and stuff, but when used correctly, I think is really important. But of course, it tends to be a one size fits all, because you have, a lot of times you're catering to hundreds of thousands of students or tens of thousands of students, and you get one hint, you get one error message, you get one blah blah blah, and it's hard to, you know, take the pros that you get from smaller in-person classes, which is that personalized care, in like an online setting. And so I wanted to do that because I thought that that was very interesting. And it was kind of hard for me to get that approved. And I thought, I don't want to spend 3 years not only doing this project, but fighting for the approval for it, you know, like, so I just decided, and then a big thing was that I realized I didn't really want to become a professor. I just really enjoyed teaching, and helping other people learn. And I can do that in industry. You do that a lot in industry, when you have new hires, when you take initiative on making improvements to either like how A/B testing is done, or like how model evaluation is done, how data pipelining is done, and then you have a chance to teach that to the people in the to your coworkers essentially, and you kind of become like the go-to person or like the owner of that. And so I realized I can get a lot of the pros that I thought I would get from being a professor in industry, and I don't spend the next 3 years being stressed that like the core of my work is validated, you know, or approved by, you know, these professors. And so I just said, I think I'm gonna get out of here.
Yeah, and I think those are the, like, you know, students, you can't always see exactly what the future holds and what the pros and cons are going to be. So I like to give this perspective, and things have to, or not, maybe don't have to, but do move slowly in academia. And you're
Yeah,
going to be working for
yeah,
years on the same project. And as you said, Michigan is a stats powerhouse, but that leaves you ingrained to do what they're known for because you have their reputation
exactly.
on the
Yeah.
line. I think that project sounds super interesting, and I could talk to you forever about it, but I'm going to hold back for the sake of time because it's for selfish reasons, and studies we did on online learning and who does it and what the outcomes are. Anyway, but okay, so you transitioned to Spotify.
Hmm.
What does your job look like now? How has that transition been?
Yeah. So
Or I guess, what
first
did it
off,
look like before
yeah,
now? And then
and
how
that's a
has that
loaded
changed?
question. Yeah. So I think what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about what I did at BuzzFeed, what made me leave to go to Spotify, and how that worked out. So at BuzzFeed, when I started full time, I wasn't really doing any of the recommendation engine stuff. I wasn't super passionate about that. But what I did do was I helped work on. I basically helped a lot of their data pipeline issues. So at the point, a lot of people were just pulling from these huge log tables, for like A/B testing, for dashboarding, etc. And so a lot of those queries were very expensive, took very long, and it was just a lot of logic, just to try and get like a bunch of simple stats or levels of aggregation that you're interested in. So I basically worked on mapping our huge log tables to a bunch of intermediate tables across different aggregation levels, so that it was easy for a lot of our a lot of analysts, to get ad hoc answers, or it helped with a lot of our A/B testing. Um, basically making sure, basically sanitizing our data, and making things, um, consolidating lot of things, the naming conventions, um, the way that we aggregated our tables, etc. So I did that, which I think helped a lot. And then I also worked on our like A/B testing, online experimenting. So if you think of BuzzFeed, you can think of, I mean, across a lot of online companies, we have different um groupings of users. We have like power users, people who are on it every day, all the time, constantly sharing, constantly clicking, constantly scrolling. And we have a lot of our friends users we have, and then of course you aggregate all of those type of users, you get like an average user. And one thing that we all know is that when you have a lot of separate dimensions, the average becomes less representative of these individuals. And so what I did was that I I looked at quantiles essentially. So I took away of us to I wrote I wrote some code, I think in R or Python, that basically looked at the quantiles of the metrics that were of interest, and then basically did like some bootstrap confidence intervals across those quantiles so that we can kind of say, well, for our power users, we can see that there was a, a large increase in, click through rate because of this change that we implemented. But for, our friends users, people who typically already have a low click through rate, the increase was only like very little. So we could kind of sort of target different types of users. And I thought that that was really cool as well. And then the last thing that I did, and this was like more of like an ongoing project, was working. I still worked across the Tasty team, and we basically realized that we didn't know a lot about how people use like the Tasty app versus how people use Tasty as social media. And there were a lot of foundational questions like, what are users even like? When do they use it? How do we know what does satisfaction with the app look like? Is the app Should the app be like geared towards like fun? Like people just want to look at recipes, like scroll through at night, like, oh wow, that looks so yummy. Oh my god, that looks so great. Or should it be more utility? Like should the social media be more for the fans and the app be more for people who actually want to cook and get recipe information and even go from the Tasty app directly to a store with the ingredients to be able to cook, blah, 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 blah. So I was doing a lot of those sort of core research questions. Um, and I realized that there was an opportunity. Someone actually reached out to me on Twitter, a Spotify manager, and was like, "Hey, I saw like your site and blah blah blah. We're hiring. I think you would be a great applicant." And when we talked about the role, I realized, oh, that's just a lot of stuff that I'm doing, but I'm not the only one really focusing on, because the data science team at BuzzFeed was kind of small at the time, between like 5 to 11 people, maybe 5 to 10 people. And I was the only one kind of doing that work. And I was like, oh, I have a team where I can learn from people who are doing this sort of work, instead of being the pioneer, because as a pioneer, it's great. But as a pioneer and new grad, it was just it was a little too difficult to make sure that I was on the right track and that I was kind of learning, the best way to be doing these things. So I was like, I want to make a big impact, which is what I was doing at BuzzFeed, but I also want the opportunity to have mentors and learn from people who are making great impacts in this work as well. And by this work, I mean a lot of these sort of researchy questions. So yeah, I applied to Spotify and I did that, and I love it. It's great. So I mean, it's pretty much exactly what I was looking for. I'm doing a lot of similar things. I'm answering a lot of foundational questions, still working on A/B testing, which I like, and also still working on a lot of data pipelining stuff, which is kind of like a necessary evil, but I kind of like as well. So yeah, my day to day right now, I mean, it's hard because I'm thinking of like day to day COVID times. Um, but I would say my typical day to day, I spend about, I mean, depending on the day, I spend anywhere between 2 to 3.5, 4 hours in like meetings. I think Spotify is kind of a meeting heavy company. Definitely didn't have that many meetings at BuzzFeed. And so I work on this team called Chemistry. Our main products are things that a lot of people know about Spotify for Discover Weekly, Release Radar, stuff like that. So it's really cool. And right now, we are trying to work on improving sort of artist representation in terms of like artist self-reported gender, artist tier. So we have these like big huge artists that you think like Drake, Taylor Swift, and then Tame Impala, and then we also have like your indie artists or like up and coming artists who don't already have millions of dollars. And how do we make sure, like, of course, let if we just sequence things in a way to where we just improve clicks and streams, a lot of times we'll just be biased towards these huge artists, but that doesn't help us achieve our goal of how do we make sure all artists on our platform can help make a living off of their work if we're ignoring these other artists who make a lot of their money, not who like don't have a huge following yet. And so a lot of things that we try and think about are how do we help increase like artist representation and like discovery in Spotify? How do we make sure that Spotify doesn't just become an echo chamber where you just listen to the same kind of music over and over? When is that okay? Like, what is Spotify's role in helping improve discovery? How do artists or how do users perceive Spotify's role in personalization? How much is too much discovery? How do we know when users are in the mood for discovery? How do we know when, and especially because a lot of times we might sequence something or we might introduce something to a user and it might be something that they want to listen to, but they're just like, oh, I'm going on a run or I'm exercising or I'm in the car. I just want to listen to my familiar music or I'm commuting or blah, blah, blah. And so how do we understand the signals between, sort of recommendation that the user doesn't like versus a recommendation that the user might enjoy, but not necessarily be in the mood for? So we think about a lot of foundational questions like that. And so I work with a lot of user researchers where we use quantitative data, a lot of streaming clicks, skips, blah, blah, blah. And then also a lot of qualitative data where we are doing surveys, interviewing users, diary studies, so that we answer the why. I mean, it's hard because even just something as a skip, I'm sure everyone here has skipped something that they've liked before because and we have this quote in Spotify, like a skip is not a skip. Like just because you skip doesn't mean that it was a bad thing that we served you. And so even something as simple as how do we know what a skip is if a skip is not a skip? Like a lot of these things we want the why for, and it's hard to just look at the way that someone interacts with the app to understand that because you just have their interaction. You don't know the meaning behind it or the reason behind it, or even the user, like, the user expectation behind when they click on something. What do they expect to get out of this? And how do we know that we're matching our user expectation? Foundational questions. How do we know a user is satisfied with the playlist? It's not just a stream, where it's not just returning, it's a number of different dimensions to that. And so, yeah, I work with a lot of user researchers to do that. And then I also work with a lot of engineers on setting up A/B tests, checking logins, analyzing them, helping, working with product managers on like different product hypotheses. What are the next steps that we get from our data? Like, how do we translate from raw data to an insight to a recommendation? Stuff like that. So that's like my day to day, 2 to 3.5 hours of meetings, a lot of hours writing like Python queries, collaborating with people, making decks like PowerPoints essentially. A lot of time is spent through that, especially because depending on what you make, it'll be circulated to data scientists, even like C-level people, like CFOs, stuff like that. And so the way that you present the information, my presentation and PowerPoint deck creating skills has like drastically improved when I went to Spotify because there are so many great ways to tell a story or to distill an insight. Tons of stuff through that. So that's like my day to day. I mean, I eat lunch. I take like breaks. Like we like a lot of big tech companies, you have the typical like there's pool, We have like a game room, game boards and stuff. We have like sewing machines. Sometimes just take a walk. The view is nice. We're four world trade on floor like 59 to 72. So sometimes I might just like get coffee with a friend or eat some snacks with a friend, and we'll just like chill on like the 70th floor, stuff like that. So that's typically what my day to day is.
I have so many questions from that. I'm going to try to distill it down to the ones that I think my students would want to hear. I think one thing that's kind of like unknown to my students is exactly how the like team structure works at these, right? So you mentioned that
Mm,
your decks go out to lots of different people, that you work on a team, and that team sits inside of data science. So to the extent that you're allowed or possible, what is the structure like for a data scientist at Spotify?
yeah. Yeah, it depends on, so Spotify, in my opinion, has this really weird structure that's kind of hard to tell in one passing. Like for me, even when I started, I feel like I had to hear this several times before I was like, okay, I get it. But I'll try and explain the best way that I can. So we essentially have these like different missions. I'm already messing up. We essentially have these like missions, and like a mission is basically like this overarching goal. So like for me, I think like my mission might be like personalization. So all the teams under this mission work under personalization in some capacity. Another mission might be like, and I might be giving it the wrong name, but like just for this interview, I'll just call it a mission. Another mission might be like markets, where all the teams under their overall goal is to figure out what is the next market to introduce Spotify to, what does market growth look like, etc. So we have these big missions, and then under that we have like a basically a bunch of sub teams, and then those sub teams have sub teams. So for me, under personalization, there's one called Quest, just ignore that. And then under that, there's one called Lex. That's listening experience. So all teams under that work on how do we know that a user is having a good listening experience. Um, and under that, those are like things like, Discover Weekly, um, basically under that are basically all the different kind of playlists that you think of. And how do we make sure that those playlists are serving the user needs when they get a listening experience? Um, and so through that, we collaborate across several teams under listening experience. And then for me in particular, I'm like listening experience, product insight. So basically, that's my job that I do. It's just under the listening experience umbrella. And we have people who answer similar questions like I do, but like all their questions are related to the home screen. Like, how do we know users are satisfied with the home screen? What is user navigation in the home screen like? Same thing with search, same thing with blah, blah, blah. And so that's like our organization structure. And so within that, yeah. So basically, you have the sub team. The smallest unit of team is called a squad, and like my squad is chemistry, pretty much. And like each squad basically has a couple of features. So we have a squad that works on like podcasts, like Your Daily Drive, blah blah blah, stuff like that. And so within each squad, you pretty much have engineers, data science, product manager, um, and if you have enough user researchers, a user researcher on the team. And so pretty much I typically, for engineering and product manager, I work usually with the same ones throughout, because we're all focused on like chemistry related things, or like discovery, artist representation related things. In terms of like other data scientists on other teams, that is when I'm working on more foundational level stuff. So like A/B testing, like superiority test versus non-inferiority testing. What is our like all of our dashboards? How do we make sure that all of those are up to date? Data pipelines, blah 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 blah. So with that, I collaborate with a lot of different data scientists across different teams. But when it comes to engineers and product managers, usually I collaborate with the same sort of people on my team. So that's kind of how it works. It's not the best way to explain it, but that's the best way that I can explain it um, in
No,
the first
and
passing.
yeah, and that makes, yeah, I feel like I would also need to like have it reviewed a few times to fully
Yeah,
understand, just because it is so intricate and there's so many moving pieces and nothing's going to fit perfectly all the time in one. And that's why you're mostly working with the same people, but you're going to have to talk to the people
yeah.
over here for certain projects. I guess for the projects that you're focused on most of the time, or the like set of projects, how is it decided, or how do you decide what to work on? My students asked about this because they have trouble where they, again, same idea you said, have a big concept. What's the next step and how do you know it's right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it just depends. So, like, a lot of dimensions that I try and make my decision on is how much time do I have to work on a problem? What is the impact in terms of like improving my skill set and also impact for the company? Um, what are the low hanging fruits across each of these different problems? Um, and yeah, typically my solution whenever I come in terms of priorities, it's like something that gives us a lot of that has a lot of good low hanging fruits, something that gets us to 80% of the goal with like 20% of the work, something that I have time, and something that I believe that I can define, something that I believe can be like a well defined problem. So, like, there are some questions like, how do users perceive Spotify's role in personalization? That is a problem that we can try and narrow down, but that is still such a huge problem that takes a ton of time, a huge team. It's so difficult to answer that question. And for me, it's like, okay, we're splitting these quarters. We have this quarter, and what are the things that we can do to help this overall goal of artist representation, improving discovery out of all those problems? What can help towards that the most? And what is interesting, like, it's not like, I'm grateful that Spotify, at least my manager tends to ask me like, what are you interested in working on? And stuff like that. So for example, and I am a very honest, straightforward person, sometimes to a fault. I'm still learning how to understand like corporate lingo and stuff. Or like, yeah, just the way that people talk in like industry and stuff. But I honestly told my manager, because I was still on listening experience, but I was on two different squads. And with the new year coming up, we were doing a slight reorg, and he asked me like, "What are the things that you were interested in getting better at?" And I said XYZ. Sorry,
You're fine.
that I should pivot from those teams and work on this other team because I know that they are working on that, and I'm a new hire ish. I want to get, that team is related to this huge mission or like this huge initiative that spans across listening experience. So I get introduced to more stakeholders that I'm not necessarily directly under. It helps raise my case for like promotions in the future. And they work on XYZ tools that I want to help improve. Um, and I mean, he made a way to help get me to that team, which I was really grateful for. So yeah, I would say, make sure that it has high impact. Make sure that it won't take forever, and that it's something that you can get a few quick wins on, but also is interesting enough to keep working on. And also make sure that you're interested in it, because my thing is, don't take the job that has the best perks. Take the job, in my opinion, people can definitely disagree. And I've had disagreements. My outlook is I take the job that has the least terrible, like like if you look at the worst outcome, this is the least worst, like, I don't if I want to be frustrated at something, I want to be frustrated about these kind of issues. I don't want to be frustrated about thinking about other kind of problems that I have no care for, because when I'm frustrated, if I don't care about it, I'm not going to do great work.
Yeah.
But if it's something that I want to work on, even when I'm frustrated or even when I'm lost, it's easier for me to push past that and keep working and do a great job. And so I want to, yeah, make sure that you guys are also working on something that you actually care about. But at the same time, there are cons to that, because I've also experienced things where I work for companies that whose product I really like, and then you learn the nitty gritty and about how decisions are made, and you're like, that kind of sucks, like the glow and stuff that this product had sort of diminishes because you kind of understand the shortcuts that are made and the blah blah blah. So there are pros and cons to that. But in terms of like projects, I always think work on something that you find interesting, even if there's something else that might have more impact. Unless you're trying to do something short term, like, okay, I'm trying to get a promotion in June and I'm gonna work February through May on this thing that's not so interesting, but will really help catapult me to get that promotion. It depends on the situation.
And I think that's just really important for undergrads to hear because and trust me, for students, I get it. Like all they see is like, I need a job and I need that job to pay well. And I don't blame them
Hmm.
for that at all. But realizing there are these like the political decisions and the negative, like there's negatives of every job and that you're allowed to care and want to do the thing you work on.
Hmm.
Now, that's in an ideal situation. You're looking for a job and you got one offer and you need to make a paycheck. Like that's a different thing.
Do it, please.
Right. But like, realizing and I see why it's hard for students to realize there's more than salary, but knowing and hearing from somebody there that there is more than just like which job makes most money. Like there's benefits, there's pros, there's
Yeah,
cons to all of that.
absolutely. And I think there are tons of times when you should make the decision on, like, I mean, opportunities for growth versus salary. You can start somewhere where you get a higher initial salary, more stock, more benefits, whatever, but you're not making as big of an impact as you might like, or you're not growing as quickly as you might want, and you're kind of just gear. You're just something that you put in there so that everything works a little more smoothly. Versus you go to another job that may not pay as well, it may not be as much of a brand name. Your people aren't as impressed if you put it on your bio or whatever people are interested in. I don't know, but you really have the opportunity for growth, and that's why I actually love my that I went to BuzzFeed at first. BuzzFeed it's popular, whatever, whatever, but it doesn't. It may not pay as well as some of the other places, but like I mentioned, I was making a lot of impact there. And through that, I really learned, like, even when I had my job, I was like, okay, well, do I want to work on a lot of ML things or like experimentation stuff or like overall research stuff? And through having the opportunity to explore all those things, I learned that, and that helped me get that job at Spotify. And I feel like if I worked at like a big place where my scope is very narrow, I might have had that opportunity to learn, oh, I actually really like a lot of product research foundational questions, because I'm just so busy doing pipelines and working on models and getting a high R squared or a high area under the curve, blah, blah, blah. So it depends on what level of career you're at. It depends on your circumstances, but definitely make sure that you want to make sure that it's something, if you can, if you have the privilege to think about that, think about your overall growth and what your interest is as well.
Yeah, I love that advice. And it is hard to put that in perspective. And so I think you've done like a really great job putting the nuances in there,
Hmm.
all the like different considerations that go into this. We're getting close to time and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So I was going to ask for one or more pieces of advice you would give to your former self or to students who are undergrads currently. Putting you on the spot here.
Yeah. I mean, career wise, never underestimate the value of your stats, especially around like hypothesis testing, A/B testing. There are a number of shortcuts that are done in experiments and a number of misconceptions and a number of not great best practices, because I think people just learn p-value, confidence interval, randomization. But there's a lot more to that. So sort of like how I mentioned, like a lot of people don't know about non-inferiority testing. A lot of people don't know about when to A/B test. When is that useful? Yeah, there's just a number of things that go on in data science, and I think for some reason the stats part is like the least interesting to people. Like you have 50 million books on models and improving your coding, but like how many new books on like experimentation are there? Interesting books with up-to-date code, up-to-date packages. Like people are just typical, you do your confidence interval by hand, you have a blah blah blah, and it's not necessarily how it works. So I do recommend always brushing up, not only on like your experimentation knowledge, but like also learning how to tell a story. We already talked about that a little bit, but learning how to distill your knowledge so that you actually people understand what's going on, what decisions you recommend and why, how you came about that. And then learning how to uh learning how to go from what's like an interesting question to you to what is impactful. Like there are tons of times when you want to do a deep dive on an analysis and you're like, well, that just satisfies my curiosity, but I should actually stop here because I need to work on these other things. And if I have time, maybe I can come back to this. But for now, let me put a pause because we got what we really need out of it. Um, yeah, I think the big part is just reiterating, knowing when to like go for growth, go for salary, go for whatever. Like if you have to send money to your parents, go for that salary and ask for more. Um, yeah. Let's see. When you get your offers, like always negotiate. I don't have best practices for negotiation. I personally just ask for like 10 to 20% more or like XYZ more. And if they say no, then they say no. I've had people say no, and I'm just like, okay. But I mean, of course, like, no matter what, even if you're like, wow, that's more than I thought, always ask for more. Always shoot for salary transparency. Don't let these people dog you. Um, and always know that a corporation, in the end, it's rarely a family. Like, no matter, like, capitalism sucks, and capitalism is how a lot of people build their companies. And this capitalist perspective, it's money to replace you, but you are still replaceable. It just costs more than what people might like because they have to interview, they have to train, blah blah blah. So one, know that. Don't try and put your allegiance to like any one corporation. You can be expend. I mean, look at how people in Lyft and what was the other one? No, maybe it wasn't DoorDash. I forgot. Like 17% of like engineers and data science and tech people in tech at Lyft just gone. And
Gone.
it's like, sorry, but it's the way it is. Like at the end of the day, the company wants to survive and they will try to survive at your expense if that's where the case comes. So don't buy into this whole we're a family, you can have coworkers, you can have great coworkers, but in terms of like the company allegiance, just do you. Like but also take advantage of that if need be. I always say, and that's why I say negotiate in an interview, because if they want to extend you an offer, that's because they know, hey, we think we might get better utility out of this person than out of other people. And we don't want to spend money having to put more ads out, having to spend other data scientists and engineers' time interviewing instead of working, etc. So it's like, hey, you're going to probably have to spend an extra tens of thousands of dollars on trying to find other candidates. So pay me a little bit more if you think that I'm that worth it. Like, use that to your advantage. I always say drain the company out of as much money as you can personally for your own benefit, and also know that there's no company allegiance to you, as if it doesn't serve their own allegiance, or as if it doesn't serve their own self-interest. Get a hobby outside of tech. Please don't become those tech people where all you do is live, breathe tech. You're boring. Well, I shouldn't be that mean. It's not. There are tons of ways to grow outside of tech, and I think having a healthy work-life balance is part of growth. So try not to just live, breathe tech as much as possible. And then always just be ready to learn. Sometimes put your ego down. Um, just because someone challenged something that you did doesn't mean that they think that you suck. That just means that they're trying to learn more. And if they do think that you suck, you can prove them wrong because you don't. Um, so don't, there'll be tons of times when you work on something and people want to challenge the need for it or how you did it, etc. Take that as an opportunity for growth. And then, in my opinion, try not to work and eat during your lunch break. Take some time away from your computer. Talk to your coworkers. Um, you know, if you're in a deadline, by all means, do what you have to do to get the work done. But I think a lot of times people look and see what other people are doing and then they just adopt that because they're like, this is the best practice or this is the status quo. Always be willing to challenge that. You're new there for a reason. You're not only there to put in work, you're there to challenge the way things are already being done. So don't shrink yourself and don't tell yourself no. That's other people's job, essentially. Like if you interview, don't knock yourself down. That's for them to say we don't accept you. Don't say that they're not going to accept you. Wait until they say that. And same thing. Don't be like, oh, people don't care about what they have to say. Let people say this is not in our best interest at the moment. Do what you think needs to be done because that's your own opportunity for growth. Don't just be given something kind of like in school. Oh, here's the problem. Here's what the solution we think looks like. Make it happen. Do what you think is best as well. So yeah, those are my like overall popsicle advice. If you like read a popsicle or whatever, fortune cookie, whatever things have advice, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think there's so many good pieces in there. I'm gonna leave my commentary out of it because I think you did a great job running the gambit from negotiations through to like when you're in the job, trusting your gut. I lied. I just
Mhm.
added my own commentary, even though I said I wasn't going to. Okay. Um,
It's great
so with
commentary.
that, I'm gonna stop the recording, but I won't end the meeting yet.
Yeah.
And so thank you very much.
Nice meeting y'all. All the
And
students who are watching this.
yeah, they will get to hear all of your wisdom in a few weeks.